must drive themselves through the busy and sometimes confusing streets of Kuala Lumpur and make their way to this ancient sacred Hindu temple known as the Batu Caves.
A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform. In this roadblock, that person must collect an offering and then climb these stairs up to the top of the temple.
If the number is correct, the priest will accept the offering. However, if they do not guess the magic number of 272, they must return to the bottom and start again.
Ascending this steep 100-meter climb is a challenge in itself, but throwing in a bunch of frisky monkeys could leave teams going bananas.
Once teams work out that their next destination is the Penang Peranakan Mansions, they must drive themselves to this 19th century building in Georgetown on the island of Penang, a 4-hour drive away. Then, as soon as they find out who, or rather what Baldwin is, they must sing their next clue. Futsal, a form of indoor football, is a popular sport in Malaysia. Teams must drive to the futsal field where both team members must take turns to be goalkeepers. For every ball they fail to save, they will incur a 2-minute time penalty. Teams must drive themselves to the Swanham Pier to find their next clue.
A detour is a choice between two tasks, each with its own pros and cons. Once teams arrive at the Swanham Pier, they must choose between flags or rags.
In flags, teams must collect 5 nautical flags scattered on board a cruise liner using only a clue that's given in ship lingo. In rags, teams must make their way to deck 10 of the Pisces cruise line, and while one person is lowered to deck 5 to clean a cabin window, the other person must locate that specific cabin and take a snapshot of his window cleaning teammate to complete the challenge.
Star Cruises is the leading cruise line in Asia Pacific. This is the first pit stop of the race. And in a historic move, this is also the first time we're ending a leg of the race on a cruise ship. The last team to check in here may be eliminated.
Teams must now travel by taxi to Batu Ferringhi Beach in Penang, where they will find their next clue. Teams must now travel to Kota Kinabalu, the capital of Sabah, named after the majestic Mount Kinabalu. This city is a gateway to East Malaysia, and it's home to some of the most diverse underwater life in the world. Once there, teams must scour the Terminal 1 parking lot where 10 marked cars are scattered. Inside the vehicle, they will find their next clue. Teams must drive themselves to this Murut warriors village and participate in a ceremonial blessing for good luck and for the ability to conquer wild beasts. Teams must make their way to the night market and eat no less than 100 chicken balls. The team that eats the most will depart 20 minutes ahead of all other teams in the next challenge. Teams must drive themselves to Sutra Harbor Marina and search for the marked boat. Hours of operation will apply.
10 o'clock. Yeah.
A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform. In this roadblock, that person must dive into these waters and find a key at one end of a piece of rope. Teams can only unlock the key to their success after unraveling this tightly wound puzzle. While this task may sound simple, this roadblock could be one of the most challenging of the race. Teams must take a boat to Sapi Island. This picturesque beach is where teams will find their next clue. Tour is a choice between two tasks, each with its own pros and cons. Once teams drive to the village of Pekan Kulu, they must choose between rapid water or rapid fire. In rapid water, teams must brave the rapids of the Kulu River using only a bamboo raft before receiving their next clue. This river can be treacherous at times, so teams will need to pit themselves against Mother Nature or risk being washed out. In rapid fire, teams must hit 2 targets using a slingshot that tribesmen use for hunting. When they are done, they can collect their clue from the village chief. Wielding this traditional weapon is harder than it seems, but teams that can stay focused on the target can still propel themselves to the front of the pack. Teams are now driving to Kampong Tanjung Aru, a charming fishing village in Kota Kinabalu. This is the second pit stop of the race. The last team to check in here may be eliminated. Teams must now make their way to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia and find the Axiata Telecoms Control Center. Here they must scan a series of international monitoring stations until they find a picture of a golden Buddha. Using this image, they must correctly identify their next destination to receive their next clue. Get it wrong, and they receive a 2-minute time penalty. Teams must now fly to Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, 2,500 kilometers away. Situated in the Indian Ocean at the base of the Indian subcontinent, this island country is home to more than 21 million people. Once teams arrive in Colombo, they must travel by taxi to Gangara Maya Temple.
At over 120 years old, this building is one of Sri Lanka's most important Buddhist temples. Here, the teams must receive a blessing from the monks before receiving their next clue.
A detour is a choice between two tasks, each with its own pros and cons. Teams must make their way to Colombo's commercial center in Peta and choose between count or carry.
In count, teams must find the fish counting station at the market and count the number of fish in a marked crate. Once they get the correct number, the stall owner will hand them their next clue.
The endless hustle and bustle of the crowded market could make it difficult for teams to get down to the guts of the task.
In carry, teams must carry 12 blocks of ice, each weighing approximately 20 kilograms, and deliver them to this stall for their next clue.
Maneuvering these huge chunks of ice through this crowded sea of people could weigh teams down.
Teams must make their way to the marked stall at the Nugigoda Station Road and sell 20 peanut bags, each worth 15 rupees. Once they have sold their stock, they will receive their next clue.
The roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, teams must make their way to the trendy connection, and one of them must use a professional sewing machine to sew a shirt from the pattern cut out. Once they have completed the task, they will receive their next clue.
Teams will need to be a cut above the rest if they hope to stitch together a victory in this leg. This is the first yield of the race, where one team can force another team to stop racing. Only after the sand has run out in this hourglass can that team proceed. Teams must choose wisely because they can use the yield only once during the entire race.
Yeah.
Independence Square was erected in 1948 to commemorate Sri Lanka's liberation from British rule. This is the third pit stop of the race. The last thing to check in here may be eliminated.
Must travel by marked taxis to Fort Railway Station, then take a train and travel 116 kilometers south of Colombo to the port city of Galle. The city was devastated by the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, but has since been rebuilt. Founded in the 16th century by the Portuguese, this fortified city has been declared a World Heritage Site. Once here, teams must search for their next clue.
This is the first fast forward of the race. The first team to find and complete it can skip all tasks and go directly to the pit stop.
Teams that wish to attempt the fast forward must travel to Galle bus station to find their next clue. Teams must make their way by three-wheeler to the Galle Lighthouse, where they will find their next clue.
A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, this person must search the beach for this wooden chest and enter the year that Ceylon became Sri Lanka to retrieve their next clue. The correct year is 1972.
While this task is not physically challenging, only teams that treasure history will unlock the key to Sri Lanka's past.
In this fast forward, teams must make their way to the Flag Street Barber and get their heads shaved the traditional way.
Only teams that have the gall to take it all off will win the Fast Forward Award.
Teams must make their way to this dialogue service center and check through hundreds of ringing mobile phones until they find a message that reads, "Congratulations, correct." Only then will they receive their next clue. Teams must travel by bus to Ambalangoda train station and collect a photograph from the masked stall vendor. They must then match this photo to a masked performer at a nearby street festival to receive their next clue. These traditional masks are famous in this region and are known for their intricate detail. They can, however, look very similar to each other, so teams must have a keen eye to spot the difference. Once successful, teams will receive a Hilton duck, which must be presented at the next pit stop.
A detour is a choice between two tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In this detour, teams must choose between coconut course or language course.
In coconut course, teams must climb a coconut tree and complete the treetop course to receive their next clue.
While scaling these 25-meter coconut trees, teams will still need to stay grounded while engaging in this century-old Sri Lankan practice.
In language course, teams must learn 10 Sinhalese words from a Sri Lankan student to receive their next clue.
While this task may sound like child's play, teams without a knack for languages could find themselves lost in translation. Kalatara Kalito Beach offers one of the most scenic views of the Kalatara Temple. This sandy stretch is the fourth pit stop of the race. The last thing to check in here may be eliminated.
Teams must now fly to Manila in the Philippines. Once there, they must make their way to Legazpi, a further 540 kilometers. Once in Legazpi, they will find their clue in a marked jeepney, the old military jeeps that are now the most popular form of public transport in the Philippines. Teams must travel by marked jeepney to Linyon Hill. one of the best vantage points to view the nearby restless Mayon volcano. Here, they must search for their next clue. Teams must travel to Barangay Budiao and then drive themselves by all-terrain vehicles along the marked course to the Cagsawa ruins. And in the shadow of the church destroyed 100 years ago by the Mayon volcano, they must search for their next clue. Teams must partake in a traditional fiesta game called Pak-Pak Palayak, where one blindfolded team member must hit a clay pot, while their teammate communicates instructions to them using only a tambourine. Teams must break the clay pot to receive their next clue.
A detour is a choice between two tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In this detour, teams will choose between two Filipino traditions in Legazpi, jig or pig.
In jig, teams must dress in traditional outfits and perform the Ibalong dance, an intricate local dance that celebrates the province's early beginnings. Once they have impressed the Ibalong judge, they will receive their next clue.
Only teams that can groove to these complicated dance moves can step up to their next clue.
In pig, teams must participate in the local fiesta tradition of catch the oily pig. Once teams have caught 2 pigs each, they will receive their next clue.
While catching these feisty animals will be a challenge in itself, teams will need to hang on tight or see their chances literally slip away. Teams will now face an intersection where they must mutually agree to join forces to make decisions and perform all tasks together before further notice.
In this intersection, teams must travel to Masibas Bay. They must then clear debris from a marked area of this recently storm-ravaged beach to receive their next clue. A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform. In this roadblock, teams must take a boat to Calabiting Beach, then select a kayak and paddle out to the flagged fish farm. Once there, they must search among hundreds of clues for the one marked correct.
While this task is not physically demanding, teams will still need to exercise some patience before they can jet on out of here.
Teams must travel by jet ski to Baguio Beach, where a jeep will drive them up a marked track to the pit stop.
The beautiful Masibas Bay is one of the forerunners in the Filipino effort to go green. This amphitheater is the 5th pit stop of the race. The last thing to check in here may be eliminated.
Teams must now travel to Invercargill, a small city at the very bottom of New Zealand. Once here, they must search for a marked camper van, which holds their next clue. Teams must drive 157 kilometers to the fishing village Te Anau, located on the banks of Lake Te Anau, and find a local fisherman who holds their next clue. Teams must now drive themselves to Pillin's Paddock near Kingston and choose a traditional wood sawing station. They must saw 5 slices from the log as a team, then in a grueling individual test, 2 single slices each.
A detour is a choice between 2 tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In what could be one of the most punishing detours in race history, one team could be given a no-way-out detour. The choice? Plunge or swing?
Plunge is a flashback challenge from Season 1. Who can forget the blood-curdling screams as teams attempted the jump? It's now back with a twist where both teammates must perform the challenge to get their next clue.
Teams that can put their life on a 134-meter line for an 8.5-second free fall will have the jump on the competition.
In swing, teams must take a swing at the famous Nevis High Wire Bungee, the world's highest swing, and be flung out 153 meters before receiving their next clue. Soaring for a distance of 120 meters, teams will really have to push each other if they hope to get into the swing of things. Teams must now drive themselves to Queenstown Event Center and must score a try by getting past 3 rugby players, some of whom are former All Blacks, the New Zealand national team. They must then kick a conversion. If they do not score this goal within the first 10 attempts, they will incur a 10-minute time penalty before receiving their next clue.
A U-turn appears at the end of a detour. Teams can use the power of a U-turn to slow down another team, forcing them to backtrack and perform the other side of the detour that they did not previously complete. Teams can use the U-turn only once in the entire race, so they must decide whether this is the right time. A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, teams must drive themselves to the First Aid Patrol Hut at Coronet Peak. Then, using the avalanche rescue locator provided, they must find the object hidden in the snow.
Teams that can't face up to the elements while searching for their clue on this massive plot of snow could be buried by the competition. Standing at a height of 1,649 meters, Coronet Peak with its breathtaking views is Queenstown's premier ski resort and is the 5th pit stop of the race. The last team to check in here may be eliminated.
Must successfully ski down a slalom course through 2 sets of flags without falling over to receive their next clue.
Choice between 2 tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In this detour, teams must choose between pen or Pinot.
In pen, teams must separate 3 marked sheep from a flock of 15 and herd them into a pen before receiving their next clue.
Sheep are notorious for being unapproachable, so only teams that can talk the talk will walk the flock.
In Pinot, teams must collect a 228-liter wine barrel, roll it to the top of this steep hill, and then fill it with wine to receive their next clue.
Teams that handle a wine barrel and don't let their patience ferment can go barreling through this challenge.
During the mandatory rest period, teams recorded messages on Sony Handycams for their loved ones back home. They now have to mail those messages at the Arrowtown Post Office to receive their next clue. Teams must now travel to Circular Quay in Sydney Harbour, Australia. Once there, they must search for a man holding an umbrella in his right hand. They must then ask him the question, "Any clue about the weather, mate?" before he'll hand them their next clue. Teams must now make their way to Hilton Hotel's Grand Ballroom, where they must face the Hilton Bed-Making Challenge. Teams must make a bed to the Hilton's high standards within 3 minutes. If they fail after 4 attempts, they'll receive a 10-minute time penalty. But the team that achieves the fastest time will win a prize at the next pit stop.
A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, teams must make their way to the Circus Arts School at Sydney Olympic Park Aquatic Centre. Here, teams must execute a flying trapeze routine to receive their next clue.
While this circus act is challenging, teams that have a firm grip of these moves will still breeze through the trapeze. Paying homage to Australia's contribution in World War I, Archibald Fountain is a centerpiece for Sydney's Hyde Park and is the 7th pit stop of the race. The last team to check in here may be eliminated.
Teams must now fly north to Brisbane, the largest city in Queensland. Once there, they must find a flagged Wicked camper van, a vehicle painted in traditional Aboriginal artwork. Here, they'll find their next clue. Teams must drive themselves to this pistol club and take turns to shoot 2 large red targets with a .44 Magnum. Each team member must shoot the red target before they'll receive their next clue. Teams must drive to Dreamworld Fun Park and ride the highest freefall in the world, the Giant Drop. Once they've risen 120 meters, teams must use their Sony CyberShot cameras to capture a photograph of the race flag being waved by a giant koala mascot. They will only have a limited time to complete the task before falling to speeds of 135 kilometers per hour. If the correct image cannot be seen on the Sony Bravia TV, they must repeat the challenge.
A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, teams must drive themselves to this rally circuit, known as the WRX Experience. One team member must complete a lap of the race course in less than 1 minute 42 seconds. If they don't make it in the required time, they must race again.
Teams that can keep their pedal to the metal on the slippery course will slide right into the pole position.
Teams must drive to Kurrawa Beach, a pristine surfing beach on the Gold Coast where clues are buried in a large flagged area. Another needle in the haystack challenge. This search could see some teams buried under the pressure.
A detour is a choice between 2 tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In this detour, teams will paint their face Aboriginal style and choose between 2 traditional practices, bush hunter or bush chucker.
In bush chucker, teams must master the art of boomerang throwing and have it spin back and land within the marked circle.
Only teams that master this iconic weapon could have a throwback into the winner's circle.
In bush hunter, teams must throw traditional hunting spears until one of them hits the hay bale. One team member must then eat a traditional Aboriginal delicacy, the witchetty grub. Only then will they receive their next clue.
Teams will really need to focus their aim if they hope to spearhead the competition. Kangaroo Point is a suburb along the Brisbane River and is a popular spot that offers spectacular views of the city skyline. This is the 8th pit stop of the race. The last thing to check in here may be eliminated.
Teams must now fly to Bali, Indonesia, and travel by fast boat to Lombok. The first 2 teams to write their names on the fast boat check-in board will depart on the first ferry, half an hour before the next boat leaves. Once they are in Lombok, they must search the Tanjong Karong fishing village for their next clue. Teams must make their way to Lombok's largest Hindu temple, Pura Meru. Once here, a priest will hand them their next clue. Teams must now make their way to Pura Lingsar Temple and through a traditional rice sowing celebration. They will then receive their next clue.
A detour is a choice between 2 tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In this detour, teams will choose between above or beyond.
In above, teams must travel to the Mandalika market and look for this flag stall. They must then select a bag of produce and deliver it to another stall in the traditional fashion on their heads to receive their next clue.
With the pressure of elimination hanging in the balance, teams better be level-headed to stay in the game.
In beyond, teams must travel to the vast Kubaran China or Chinese cemetery and search for the grave of Pham Sam Moy.
Teams that are blessed with good fortune on these hallowed grounds could vary the competition.
Teams must now make their way to the picturesque Malimbu Beach where they'll find their next clue.
A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, teams must travel by outrigger to the island of Gili Trawangan. Here, they must learn to scuba dive, then search Halik Reef for a briefcase full of money. They must then travel by Chidomo, a horse and cart, to this beachside cafe. Here, they must count all the money in the briefcase and enter the correct amount into the Sony Vaio laptop before receiving their next clue. If they do not get the answer correct within 3 attempts, the computer will force them to wait 10 minutes before they can re-enter another amount. Teams will need to be on top of their game mentally and physically if they want to be on the money.
The Gili Islands are a popular spot in Lombok. Gili Trawangan is the largest of the 3 islands and is the 9th pit stop of the race. The last thing to check in here may be eliminated.
Teams must fly to Pohang, South Korea, where they must decode their clue. Pohang is home to Hamagat Sunrise Plaza, where the Hands of Harmony sculpture represents unification between the South and North of Korea. Teams must take a taxi to the Hands of Harmony to find their next clue. Teams must now drive themselves to Gyeomsa Temple. Built in the year 643, Gyeomsa Temple was a hiding place of Korean resistance fighters fighting for the independence of their country. Once teams arrive, they will find their next clue. Each team member must take turns to answer a series of questions regarding the race. Once their answers match, they will receive their next clue. The challenge will be the ultimate test of how well they've been communicating throughout the race. Teams must make their way to Sukuram Grotto, where they must ring the unification bell 3 times to receive their next clue.
A detour is a choice between 2 tasks, each with its own pros and cons. In this detour, teams must choose between bow and arrow or rock and roll.
In bow and arrow, teams must try their hand at the ancient art form of archery. After choosing a team photograph, they must hit the target 3 times to receive their next clue.
Teams that master these weapons used since prehistoric Korea will be on target for the final 3.
In rock and roll, teams must build a ceremonial pagoda of rocks to a predetermined height for their next clue.
Teams that can't stack this task to a height of 1 meter will be stuck between a rock and a hard place. A roadblock is a task that only one person may perform.
In this roadblock, teams must travel to this ancient tomb complex and solve the warrior code. Warriors guard 3 rows of gates, each with 1 correct gate. If they choose the wrong gate, they will be stopped. They will have 3 attempts before going back to the end of the queue. Once they successfully get to the end of the course, they will receive their next clue from the warrior master.
Teams that break the warrior code can be rewarded with a clear path through the gates of this task. Built in 674 AD, the Inaptipan was part of a sprawling palace complex during the ancient Silla dynasty. This heritage site is the 10th pit stop of the race. The last thing to check in here may be eliminated.